First, let me set up some background to make the flow of the story smoother. This happened almost 19 years ago. I was nearly 13 years old, and I was being raised by my grandparents. We lived in a little tourist town in Florida. They had problems with their two daughters as adults, my mother being the older of the two, and they wanted to do everything that they could to make sure that I didn't turn out the same way. A do-over, if you will. So needless to say, they were very strict. My aunt was having a good period. She had her stuff together. We were all very close. My aunt understood what it was like to be raised under a glass dome, metaphorically speaking. They raised her too, after all. So being as she was my only aunt, she made sure that the time we spent together was always super cool. I would stay over Saturday nights. We would go out and hang out at the pier, and she would let me hang out with my middle school boyfriend who would find ways to get to wherever I was. My grandparents had no idea of any of these activities, of course. I was just spending some quality time with my aunt and giving them a break. It was nice that I had a younger female figure since my mom wasn't around. One night when we were out having fun, my aunt meets this guy, and they really hit it off. He was very nice and introduced himself to me. He went by John, and at first was a kind and charming talker. They exchanged numbers after hanging out a while, and then we went home and went to bed. They ended up going out a bit more, and my aunt had really liked John. He took her to his home and introduced her to his father and showed her around his land. He lived out in the woods in the middle of nowhere. I've lived in this town for 30 years, and I still to this day couldn't tell you where it is. I was only there once. He was teaching my aunt how to shoot a gun. I remember her shoulder rocking back with the impact of the shot, and it surprising her. He had these weird flamenco dancing clothes in his closet. It was all seemingly harmless. I mean, everyone has their quirks. About 10 days, maybe 2 weeks later, we were again at the pier out by the payphones talking about what to do that night and what to get for dinner. John and my aunt were in their late 20s, early 30s, and as much as she loved me, I imagine there were times that I got in the way. Well, anyway, we were at the pier and he is talking about how he has these painkillers. He offered me one. I declined, of course, and told him I had a high tolerance to pain anyway and didn't need that stuff. He then, with a huge smile, asks me if he can see for himself, assuring me he won't really hurt me, he's just trying to have fun. This bastard twists my arm behind my back until I hear a pop. I start to cry and he laughs and says,
"Aw, sweetheart, I was only playing. You said you had a high tolerance. I guess I was stronger than I thought I was being. I'm sorry. No need to ruin the good time we are all having."
I go in the private pier office, which my granddad managed, crying. My aunt comes in. I tell her what happened, and she lets me know that she thinks it's up too, and that she will talk to him about it. She goes back outside, and he asks her what she is up to that night. She tells him that she isn't sure if I am staying over because, with what had just happened, I was whining about going home. I was pissed that she hadn't decked him right there for hurting me. Well, he tells her that she should meet him under, let's call it the Sunset Bridge, at 2 a.m. on the other side of town. He says that the stars are beautiful and you can listen and hear the fish. He tells her he would love to see it with her, and they can dance under the moon. We were all from a fishing family and live in a fishing town, so fish activities under the bridge at late times wasn't necessarily something that threw up a red flag. If it's dark and late, there won't be people there hogging all of the fish. She tells him maybe, and we leave. I decide to spend the night after all, later sneaking in only if she will pick up my boyfriend Charlie, playing up on guilt points. She calls him when she gets home, before we made our arrangement about Charlie, and says that she can come but she will have me with her. He groans and says,
"Fine, all right, I guess she can come too. Maybe she will get tired and sleep in the car."
About an hour after she called John the first time, I ask her about Charlie and she agrees. She sits down with me and hugs me and touches my face lovingly, apologizing for what had happened with my arm. My aunt was an amazing woman, and I love her very much. She then calls him again and tells him not to worry. She is picking up Charlie, so I will have my own entertainment and they can have their time. He goes into a rage and starts sputtering and cussing about how it's too complicated now, and he just wanted an intimate meeting with her, not a damn family reunion. He went on about how he didn't want to have to babysit a 13-year-old kid and her 14-year-old boyfriend. He hangs up after calling her a crazy biatch. She bewilderingly hangs up the phone and tells me what happened. We go about our night with pizza rolls and PlayStation and things are fine. He calls her a few more times, and drives by the house for a couple of weeks, but my aunt was having none of it. After a while, he left our lives just as swiftly as he had came. The whole relationship lasted only a month, if even that, 3 weeks maybe, and all in all, it wasn't the craziest experience she has had with a man. John was soon forgotten, and we went about our business. Flash forward 2 years later, I am almost out of middle school. My aunt had moved to a city about 40 miles away. I still lived with my grandparents. They were still strict, but as they had gotten older, so had I. I knew a few ways around the rules. One day my friend Frank and I missed the bus home from school and called our good high school friend Darla to pick us up and take us home after riding a bit. She had this big beautiful red truck, and I would ride around in the cab of it, loving the freedom and the wind. We were smoking cigarettes and laughing, listening to the radio. The time I would have spent on the bus before my stop was just enough time to hit up the taco drive-thru. We cruised down the road a bit before heading back to Frank and I's separate houses. He lived just down the road. We had a lot of fun that day. She dropped me off first. My grandparents came outside. They were heavily confused at the sight of an unknown vehicle, and even more so when they saw that I had gotten out of it. After letting her be the one to explain, because she was older, cooler, and more responsible, my parents thanked her for being kind enough to take me home. They said how lucky I was that she had just happened to be there to help me get home. The things we do to our parents, huh? That was the last time we ever saw my friend. She didn't show up for work for 5 days. I can't speak for everyone, but I assumed she just had ran away. Darla's parents were going through a nasty divorce. The dad had a hot new girlfriend, and the mother was very bitter about it. Rightfully so, I guess. It was embarrassing for all of the kids. Her truck wasn't left behind. I figured she got tired of her parents acting like infants and took off. I missed her, but she was in a whole other league of freedom and coolness. 16 is a whole different life than 14, especially when you are in different schools. I wished her well, maybe even a little envious that she got out of this town and I was still here. I hadn't heard anything for 2 weeks about her, when at about 9 o'clock at night my grandparents got a phone call to turn on the news. Darla's body was found out in the woods. She had been strangled to death and just left out there. I don't even know for how long. I was devastated. I was so joyful that I had that last experience with her, but so saddened and horrified. She was so young, barely older than myself. She was about to be 17 in just a short time. It was a very sad time for our town. The good and bad news is they caught the guy that had done it. He confessed after some very incriminating evidence, and during his questioning also confessed to killing his girlfriend who had been missing for about 8 years, and also his father, staging his death to look like a suicide by hanging. When they showed his mugshot on the screen and said his name, I swear I almost passed out. There, clear as day on the screen staring back at me, was a picture of John. I had no idea they even knew each other. I can't even imagine what would have happened if we had gone under the bridge that night. Investigation Discovery Channel did a piece on it a couple of years back. I was shocked to see it on the TV. The memories came rushing back and I decided to write them all down. I literally have a newfound appreciation of life now that I'm old enough to understand just how close I could have come to being killed. I have a beautiful life now with my husband and 3 boys. That most likely wouldn't have happened if things had gone differently that night. I almost had to shoot someone on my first Tinder date. I was 21 and recently became a police officer, and was also recently dumped. So my friend suggested I try Tinder. As a 21-year-old and new cop, I had the I'm invincible and can take on anyone mentality. I matched with a very good-looking, out-of-my-league female. We chatted and eventually set up a date to meet. She said she had a great open field to look at stars and hang out, and we could meet up at her house. So the night came. I was excited, and she seemed to be excited when I picked her up. She guided me to the field, and it looked nice. Open space, woods, deer, and other wildlife. In the field, I noticed really dim headlights in the distance. Then, the van started driving towards us and pulled up in front of us, almost close enough to block me from going forward. I told her to stay in the car, and I'll go say hello. I grabbed my flashlight I had in the car and walked up. To the front driver's side of the van, there was a decently sized man. I asked him what's going on and if he could back his car up a little bit. He was very polite, said he was the owner of the property, and said he didn't mean to scare us. He told me he's been having trouble with poachers on his property and just wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shooting at anything. I assured him we only came out to look at some stars and wildlife. He was perfectly okay with that, told me to have a nice date, and drove away. After that, the girl was texting nonstop. Around an hour later, I saw headlights coming towards us again, this time at a really fast pace. We hopped in the car, and I moved it to a more defensive position. The same man came close enough to almost hit my car. Then, without saying a word, she hopped out of my car and ran towards the guy. I immediately knew I was screwed. I got out and gave them commands to back up and get on the ground. Neither of them complied, obviously. He then proceeded to charge me and knock me to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get him on his back and get up. I saw my date grab a metal pipe from the van. She told me they had a gun, and to give them my money and truck, and I won't get hurt. Of course, with my I'm invincible mentality, I said no. She started to cry and saying they didn't want to hurt me. He then started to go back towards the car. At that point, I told them I was a cop, drew my concealed firearm, and to lay on the ground. After a moment of shock from all of us, they complied. I was able to call 911, tell them my name and badge number. I had two at gunpoint, and needed backup immediately. I gave our dispatcher the best directions I could to this field. While on the phone, they both fled. Again. Stupid new cop, young guy mentality, I chased them. I took off after the man who ran into the woods around the field. I chased him for maybe 30 seconds, then suddenly heard 3 loud pops and saw muzzle flash. My I'm invincible mentality went right out the window. I ran like hell back towards my car and peeled the hell out of there. I went back to the area I picked her up in, called dispatch again, and had officers come to that location. Of course, the first officers to pull up was my sergeant and my field training officer. Of course, they were both completely understanding and didn't give me any shit about it at all. The most used words were dumbass and stupid effing rookie. I hopped in their car and went towards the field. Luckily, the van was still there. I was told to shut my mouth and only come out if they start getting shot at. They cleared the area and started searching the van. They found meth right on the center console and searched the rest of car. What scared me the most was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car. They let me out and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale and looked horrified. I went to the back of the van, where there were several knives, duct tape, lighter fluid, a decent amount of rifle ammunition, handcuffs, and what looked to be dried blood. In the front seat passenger side, we found an AR-15 style rifle and 2 more handguns. We called for immediate backup and detectives. When they investigated the blood, it turned out it wasn't blood. I have no idea what it actually was. The plates had been stolen, and the van was also reported as stolen. I still get shit about the whole encounter, but luckily no one got hurt. I will never use online dating again, ever. So, a little background here. My father was in the Army for 21 years, retired and moved to a very small town in Central Florida. He got bored after a couple of years, and even though we didn't need the money between his retirement and what my mom was making as a bookkeeper, he wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations, and it being a small town, the owners wouldn't care if I came there and helped him out with stocking the coolers, or even running the register, as long as I didn't sell any beer or smokes. This all took place in the late 80s and early 90s. The actual story I'm going to tell took place in 1990, and I remember the date well, because it was shortly after my birthday, and being 15 in Florida, I had just gotten my learner's permit, and my dad would let me drive him to and from work, just to get some experience on the road, both at day and at night. I was sitting in my usual spot at a table that was set up along the windows, book in hand, feet propped up, and a Mountain Dew on the table, along with some snacks. I would generally spend most of the evening that way, reading books, getting up to run the register and stock the cooler at different times. I remember glancing up because something caught my attention that was unusual, and I realized that a lady was walking up our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. The gas station was right on I-75. This in itself was really strange, because where we were located you didn't get many people walking, and definitely not walking from the direction of the interstate. I figured she had broken down somewhere, and was coming to use the phone to call for a tow truck or something. I was completely wrong. She came into the store, looked around for a few minutes, and I remember getting just a strange and creepy feeling about her. She walked up to the counter and started telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and needed a ride up to the next big town up north from us. Ocala was the town. My dad lets her know that he's working, and there is no way that he can take her. She turns and looks at me, and while she's looking away from him, my dad catches my eye and subtly shakes his head no. I was confused for a second, but then she turns back to my dad and points at me, asking if I can take her. My dad responded back that I only had a learner's permit and wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere and then drive back. Normally I would have done it, even though it was illegal, because I'd done it a few times before already. I didn't argue with my dad, since this was completely out of character for him. He was normally chatty with the customers, but for whatever reason he was almost curt and dismissive of her. Turns out he had a bad vibe about her from the minute he had seen her walking up the drive. Well, she cusses him for a minute, and he basically tells her to get out of the store. She slammed the door open. I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she had slammed it, and then she stalks out of the store and down the driveway. I keep an eye on her, and continue to watch as she makes her way back up to the interstate, and then starts up the northbound on-ramp. Almost a year passes, and I'm in my bedroom, less than a week before my 16th birthday. I hear my dad yelling from the living room.
"Son, get your butt in here and look at this."
I quickly run to the living room and see my dad pointing at the TV, and look at the mugshot of the lady up on the screen, and I immediately remember the lady who had been in the store. Turns out I almost gave a car ride to Aileen Warnos, who was later convicted of being a serial murderer and then later put to death. I still have nightmares about what could have happened that day.
Don't skip this.